Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But everyone seems to be buying this narrative that the science is settled and the Earth is warming. We have to act now.
You say everyone. I'm not
I
so
don't
sure.
say everyone. A lot of politicians.
A lot of
particular.
politicians are very attractive to this because it gives them power.
Right, and it's hard to define.
Yeah.
And you can argue, and if you argue against it, you're a bad person.
Well,
That's a good one.
you do all that, but we spend part of a year in France. My wife is French. Ordinary people, once you get to the countryside, don't take this all that seriously.
Right.
Here, too, I suspect ordinary people have more skepticism than many people who are more educated.
Yes, but unfortunately, these ordinary people sometimes are impacted by these politicians' decisions where they have to, in the UK, they were getting rid of cows. They were forcing people to kill cows.
They're paying 3 times more for their heating and their electric bills.
Right.
I mean, it makes people poorer. It's making it almost impossible to electrify parts of the world that need it, and that involves billions of people. No, I mean, it's doing phenomenal damage and pain, but, I think for politicians and for many people who are well off, they need something that gives meaning to their life, and saving the planet seems sufficiently grandiose for their ambitions.
How are these net zero policies stopping people from getting electricity?
Well, by making it expensive, by eliminating fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are cheaper. At least the experience in the UK is when you switch to, quote, renewables, it tripled the price of electricity.
Right, but what I'm talking about is like third world countries, parts of the world that are undeveloped.
They can't afford it.
And that's all it is. They can't afford it.
Yeah.
But they also, if they didn't follow these net zero policies, what kind of plants are we talking about? Are we talking about coal plants?
Coal, anything, whatever is available.
Yeah.
I mean,
So you think even though coal does pollute the environment and it releases particulates, right? That's an issue, right?
How shall I put it? It's always a matter of cost. We have a plant, I think, in Alabama that has basically as clean as any other plant that burns coal. You can clean it. You can scrub it. You can get rid of almost everything except CO2.
Okay, so the particulates aren't as big of an issue as they used to be in the past? Is that
I
what
agree.
it is? They're more efficient? Okay.
Yeah.
So so this net zero thing is stopping them from installing modernized coal plants in parts of the world that do not have electricity. And the overall net negative weighs much heavier in not bringing these coal plants in.
I think so.
And not bringing these people into the first world.
Yeah, and there are, of course, the alternative natural gas and so on, which are available in places. There are places where you're lucky, like in Norway or Canada, Quebec, where you have hydro, which is intrinsically clean. But there's a problem with politicians. I remember once being in D.C. and some Republican politicians came and said, "You know what we just did? We banned incandescent light bulbs." They said, "Wasn't that a great thing?" I said, "That's the stupidest thing I've heard today. What's the point?" Because at the time, what was replacing it? Compact fluorescents, which were awful. All they had to do was wait and do nothing, and LEDs would come along, and people would say, "Okay, I prefer that." Instead, they feel they have to do something.
And they would switch to fluorescents, which turned out to be terrible for people.
Yeah.
So incandescents aren't bad for you?
They were simply less efficient than in terms of the number of watts of heat they generate versus light. I mean, LEDs are phenomenal that way.
Right. They're the best. Yeah. Well, it's interesting when they have these decisions that they make like that do turn out to be negative ultimately, and that yet people still allow them to make silly decisions that don't seem to be making sense.
Yeah, I think there's an old cliche, money is the root of all evil.
Yeah, that's what I was going to get to. This is the disturbing thing that I think a lot of people have a hard time accepting, especially a lot of very polite, educated people that have followed the narrative that you follow if you're a good person and if you're a person who trusts science And that is that, like, we have a serious problem. We have to address it now, or there will be no America for our grandchildren. This is the thing that we keep hearing.
You mentioned a tough thing there, the business trusts science.
Yes.
It's not a great idea because science is not a source of authority. It's a methodology. It's based on challenge.
Right.
And so,
where does narrative come from then? Trust the science.
The success of science. In other words, this is a relatively new way to approach the world. I mean, a few hundred years.
Mm-hmm.
And the notion is, and I think it's been stated many times, you test things, and if they fail to predict correctly, they're wrong. So you find out what's wrong with them. You don't fudge them, and you don't change the rules. It's led to immense improvements in life, development of all sorts of things, and so it has a good reputation. Politicians have less of a reputation, so they wish to co-opt the reputation of science.
Yes, that's a very good point, because try finding a good politician that everybody agrees is rock solid. You can find plenty of science that everybody thinks is amazing.
Yeah.
Cell phone technology, nuclear power, so many things that people go, that's incredible that they did that.
Well, that's also confusing technology with science.
The result of science.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, which is also an issue, right? And when you can get politicians to attach themselves to narratives that are supposedly connected to science.
You mentioned Gore at the beginning.
Yes.
With that thing, he was showing this cycle of ice ages and CO2 and temperature going together. And it never bothered him that the temperature changed first and then the CO2.
Yeah, Greg Braden was on the podcast recently. He was explaining there have been times where the CO2 was much higher in the atmosphere, but the temperature was colder.
Oh, yeah.
So it's not like we can point to, like, look at the dinosaurs. We don't want to live the way the dinosaurs lived. Look how much CO2 they had. And then the other really inconvenient thing with CO2 is that the Earth is actually greener than it has been in a long time.
I mean, I think we'll speak to that. But, I mean, essentially the increased amount of CO2 in the industrial era has added greatly to the arable land. And in fact, there's a funny story. Do you know the name E.O. Wilson? Have you ever heard that name?
I do. I have heard it, but I don't know where.
He was a biologist at Harvard. He wrote about sociobiology. His specialty were ants and bees and things, social insects. And he was giving a talk, and it came up for reasons that were not obvious to me. He was talking about the population of humanoids. And he was mentioning that you go back, a few 100,000 years, and you began the first humanoids, and they got to about a few million. But then during the last glacial maximum, the numbers went down to tens of thousands. There was a complete wipeout of humans. So I asked him afterwards, I said, do you think this could have anything to do with the fact that CO2 was so low that there was no food? And his response was to turn around and walk away.
That's an inconvenient truth, sir.
Right.
It's just, to me, it's very strange to see an almost unanimous acceptance of that we have settled this, that the science is settled, from so many people on both the left and in academia, and even on the right. There's a lot of people on the right that believe that.
Yeah, I know. And it should be the first thing that makes you suspicious.
Yeah, right. There's a consensus.
Yeah, I mean, this
Especially
is not how science is done.
Something that's never static. The weirdest thing is when you look at the charts of the overall temperature of Earth that have been, from core samples over a long period of time. It's this crazy wave, and no one was controlling it back then. And we're supposed to believe that we can control it now, that we can do something about it now.
There's something else about it which I find funny, and you might have some insight into it. people pay no attention to the actual numbers.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not talking about big changes. You know,
Right.
in other words, you know, for the temperature of the globe as a whole, between now and the last glacial maximum, the difference was 5 degrees, but that was because most of the Earth was not affected. Much of the Earth, anyway, very much. But, you know, somebody says 1 degree, a half degree. What's his name? Gutierrez at the UN says the next half degree and we're done for. I mean, doesn't anyone ask a half degree? I mean, I deal with that between, you know, 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. I mean,
It does seem crazy. It's just that kind of fear of minute change that they try to put into people. And what I think people need to understand that are casual observers of this is what you discussed earlier. How much money is involved in getting people to buy into this narrative so you can pass some bill that's called Save the World Climate, some crazy like that,
well,
where
they call
everybody
it
goes along.
they call it the Inflation Reduction Act.
Oh, even better. Who doesn't want to reduce inflation?
Right.
Yeah.
And then next thing you know, there's windmills killing whales and all kinds of nonsense. But the point being, it is a fascinating science. Like the science itself is fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
You get rid of the ideology and you stop attaching this thing versus, you know, you're either pro-science or anti-science. Just look at the actual data of it. It's absolutely fascinating. And these minute changes, the fact that the precession of the equinoxes where the Earth wobbles, like the whole thing is nuts. Like the whole temperature, and it has to stay relatively stable in order to keep us alive in terms of like can't go too low, can't go too high. We're in this Goldilocks zone.
The interesting thing is during the ice ages, we almost get wiped out.
It got really close, right?
And what's interesting about that is, as far as temperature goes, okay, yeah, the poles have gotten much colder. You have ice covering Illinois, 2 kilometers of ice. That's uninhabitable. But you get south of 30 degrees latitude, not very different from today in terms of temperature. And so you would think you had 100,000 years, people would sort of migrate to an area where it was now pleasant. Trouble was, without CO2, which went down to about 180, there wasn't enough food for the people.
Oh, so there wasn't enough plant life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get down to 160, 150, all life would die. There would be not enough food for anything.
What's it at now? Like 240?
No, we're now 400
400?
something. Yeah. 410.
430 maybe today, yeah.
Okay. When you first started discussing this and when you first started getting interested in this, how much pushback did you get?
Interesting question. Actually, quite a lot, but I mean, it took very funny forms. So, for instance, in, 1989, for instance, I sent a paper to Science magazine questioning whether this is something to worry about. And they sent it back immediately saying there was no interest. So I sent it to the Bulletin of the American Meteorological Society, and they reviewed it and published it, and the editor was immediately fired.
Wow.
About 10 years later, working with some colleagues at NASA, we found something called the iris effect, that clouds, which were greenhouse effect at the upper levels, contracted when it got warm, letting more heat out, so cooling as a negative feedback. And we got the paper, got reviewed, was published. Again, the editor was fired immediately. But the new editor came on immediately and said, he's inviting papers to criticize it. And suddenly there were tons of papers criticizing it, looking for anything that differed from what we did, including one that found a difference that actually made the CO2 even less important, but it was different, so he thought he could pass it through. No, it's insane. And even now, there's something called gatekeepers. I don't know, are you familiar with the release of emails from East Anglia?
No, I'm not.
Okay. This is 20 years ago or something almost. Somebody anonymous released the emails from a place in England, the University of East Anglia, which has a lot of people pushing climate alarm, and they were communicating with other people like Michael Mann and so on. And they were talking about blocking publication and getting rid of editors and doing this and doing that and so on. And that was all public. Wow. And it had no impact at all.
That sounds like that should be illegal.
Yeah. Well, the whole business with, how shall I put it, peer review, it is not ancient. Before World War II, very few journals had peer review. And in fact, when I have students look at old journals from the 19th century, one of the big surprises is they are less formal than today's papers. They are literally discussions among scientists about their results, their questions, their uncertainties, and so on. There's real communication. Today, there's much more formality in the papers. There's also, in my field, the Meteorological Society actually did a poll or a study, how often are papers referred to? And it turns out the average paper is referred to once.
Wow.
So you have these things, papers are written to satisfy the funding agency,